Good afternoon, everyone. To commence the event, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are on. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their continuous care of and deep connection to this land. On behalf of Clearwater and the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, DELP, we welcome you to this launch of the online Navigator Tool Resource Portal. Clearwater has been providing support and capacity building for stormwater management and integrated water management for almost 20 years. The program is hosted by Melbourne Water with project-specific support from DELP. We are very proud to partner with DELP on this project and to provide a critical online guide to Victoria's stormwater planning requirements for subdivisions, buildings and works developments. I'm Tanya Strazina from Clearwater, and I'd like to introduce you to the panel for today's launch. Jamie Commerly, an independent IWM consultant who has been working closely with Clearwater to develop the portal, will be today's MC and will take us through the demonstration of the layout and function of the portal. Mandy Bolton from DELP will introduce the policy context for the portal. Petra Katona from Clearwater will discuss the development of the portal, and Tina Alvi from Clearwater will also assist in moderating the question and answer segment. Now I'll hand over to Jamie to discuss the format of the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tanya, and good afternoon, everyone. As Tanya mentioned, Clearwater's asked me to help co-facilitate today's session and to provide a brief step through of the tool itself as an overview of how it works. So the main aim of today's session, in addition to formally launching the tool, which is great, is to familiarise attendees with the look, feel and function of the tool to facilitate and encourage you all to jump online and have a go yourselves. Whilst we won't have time today to cover all of the tool contents and offerings in detail, we'll focus in on the key aspects which should set you up nicely to use and further explore the tool and the associated resources in your own time. In terms of the session format for today, we'll shortly hear from Mandy Bolton and Petra Katona as part of the introductions to the session. Following that, I'll spend 10 minutes running through the main online Navigator tool webpage itself. And then we'll pause for 10 minutes of Q&A, where you'll have the opportunity to ask our panel any questions regarding what you've seen so far. We'll then spend an additional 10 minutes familiarising you with the various resources that the tool also offers. And following that, we'll have the opportunity for further questions to the panel on the resources, and then indeed on anything more general before we wrap up and finish at 1 p.m. Now, as someone's already asked, are we on mute? Well, everyone except for the presenters are today, basically because we've had, as I say, over 250 registrations for the event, and it might get a little bit unwieldy and unmanageable otherwise. So we do really encourage you all to ask questions and share your thoughts and comments today, but you know, we love an interactive session, but with over 250 people registered, we've had to put a little bit of structure around it. So just on the housekeeping front, I would ask that you please ask any questions via the Zoom Q&A function. So you'll find the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You're welcome to submit Q&A questions throughout the presentation as we're demonstrating the tool, as those questions occur to you, and a co-facilitator, Tina, will then ask the panel the most popular questions during the designated Q&A breaks. You will be able to see questions that other people ask, and you can like a question to, in essence, vote up its priority to be answered by the panel. So it's likely with these attendee numbers that we won't be able to pose all questions to the panel, and so we'll focus on those that, in essence, get the most likes. Please use the Zoom chat function for general comments and dialogue. So the chat button is also available on the same Zoom toolbar, probably at the bottom of your screen. Please, it's fine to, again, to have dialogue as we go throughout the session to each other and perhaps making comments and perhaps even answering some or responding to some of each other's thoughts. But please, if you have a question, do make sure it goes via the Q&A button. Otherwise, it won't get posed up to the panel. Just a note that questions and comments are really welcome. They help us to look at how we can improve the tool in the future, perhaps add to our FAQs and the like. And I also note there is an opportunity for you to provide feedback on the tool itself via the tool website, and I'll speak about that in a moment. So that's it for the housekeeping. I'll now hand over to Mandy Bolton to provide a brief outline of the planning policy context. Thanks, Mandy.
Hi all, thanks for taking the time to attend today's launch webinar. We know that unmanaged stormwater runoff is the biggest ecological threat to receiving water environments, and Victoria has a strong policy context to improve stormwater management for greener, cooler environments and healthier waterways, as listed here. Next slide, thanks. In October 2018, following the recommendations of the Improving Stormwater Management Advisory Committee, the Minister for Planning introduced significant planning reforms under Amendment VC 154. This amendment amended state planning policies related to integrated water management to embed these objectives into urban land use planning in the planning policy framework at clause 19.03. The amendment also introduced new stormwater management provisions for urban development, a new clause at 53.18, and amending an existing clause 55.03. So therefore extending stormwater requirements to a broader range of development types. Next slide, thanks. So in summary, the following development types listed here are required to meet the best practice objectives for stormwater management under the Victoria planning provisions, or the VPPs. The stormwater objectives these developments are required to meet are documented in the best practice environmental management guidelines for urban development, known in Victoria as the Stormwater BEPM. A range of these development types are also required to manage stormwater for additional objectives, such as for urban cooling, habitat and amenity, maximising infiltration of stormwater, controlling harmful chemicals, and site management standards. Next slide, thanks. The Stormwater Advisory Committee's report also documented 3 capacity building recommendations to support industry practice change relating to the planning reforms. These were build technical expertise through the provision of training for councils and other stakeholders, develop revised guidance material, promote awareness of planning changes to the general public and building and development industries. So to support this industry practice change and help meet policy objectives for stormwater management, DELP has delivered 21 information sessions to an audience of close to 1,000 people. And from 2020, these training sessions were broadened out to cover all of Victoria's stormwater requirements, so not just the new requirements under the amendment. And further training sessions will be delivered in 2021 through Planet, which is the professional development arm of the Planning Institute, and through Clearwater. DELP has also developed stormwater planning resources. So DELP's stormwater webpage for urban development houses these DELP checklists and guidance on how to meet stormwater planning requirements. These resources are linked to the portal and will be discussed further in today's webinar. And finally, the online Navigator Tool Resource Portal that we are launching today. It's a decision support tool to assist planning system users identify stormwater management requirements set out in the VPPs, links to the DELP checklists and guidance, as I said, and also lots of other useful additional resources. And it's the comprehensive guide to Victoria's stormwater planning requirements. So the portal, originally when we were first discussing with Clearwater, started off as a tool to meet new requirements under the amendment. Then it broadened out again to encompass all of Victoria's stormwater planning requirements, and then broaden out once more to become a comprehensive resource portal and one-stop shop for state planning requirements. So that was really supported by the user feedback that we got from many of you that I'm sure are in the audience today. So we thank you for that. So DELP is committed to assisting industry meet the stormwater planning requirements and deliver policy objectives for green environments and healthier waterways. And Clearwater and I are very excited to be launching the portal today. And over to you, Petra.
Thank you, Mandy. Yes, so I'd like to provide you with a truly brief overview of how complex the development process was, so you can really see that there isn't one word in the portal which we haven't discussed at some point of the development. Yes, so we've worked with an impressive mix of stakeholders to make sure that we capture all the aspects important for planning permit applicants and assessors. and we did everything in our power to make sure that it's logical and straightforward to use the portal. So now we'll talk about the development steps in a bit more detail. So just to give you an idea. So we started with the draft content testing, testing the concept with key stakeholders. And building on their feedback, we moved on to the web creation and upload phase. So the portal was created for testing, but not yet published. So once we had a first version to test, we went out and had 2 rounds of user acceptance testing. So we tested the tool with a selected group of the audience and invited their feedback. The first round had 12 participants, the second round had 17. And they came from a variety of organizations, local councils, consultancies, governmental authorities like DELP or EPA or Melbourne Water. And using their feedback in the first round, we implemented some changes in the tool, tested it again in the second round, and then we incorporated all those changes into the final version. The frequently asked questions part of the portal, that part is mainly based on the user acceptance testing processes. We've worked with highly knowledgeable experts with a lot of industry experience, and we are very grateful, as Mandy said as well, that they could find time to support the development of the portal. And I know that some of these experts are present today, so thank you. So this takes us to the launch today, keeping in mind that this portal will be a dynamic resource reflecting changes in the regulation. And something very important to add is that during the development of the portal, there have been some changes in the Clearwater team. So I'd like to acknowledge Kim Musala, Kat Hawkins, and Mary Caddiswood, who played essential roles in the development of the portal. I believe they're all present today in the audience. Yes, so that was me. So now I'd like to hand over to Jamie.
Thanks very much, Petra. So now's a chance for us to really dive into the tool itself. So I'll just quickly switch screens. Okay. So before we start, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things. We won't be talking much today about the various planning clauses themselves. So as I said at the start, today's session is really about familiarising yourselves with the tool and the resources themselves. Mandy's already spoken a little bit to the policies, and there's further training support provided by DELP and Planet around that. I also want to reiterate that the tool focuses on the statewide planning policies relating to stormwater management. So it doesn't include all of the local planning policies and specific council requirements that might be out there, particular to individual councils. So I just want to flag that up front. We're dealing today with what's actually in the Victoria planning provisions, that is the statewide version of things. So the online Navigator tool can be located on Clearwater's website via the resources page at clearwatervic.com.au. So I think the Clearwater team have provided you with a link to that prior to today's presentation. So hopefully you've all got access to that now. The online Navigator tool consists of 2 key parts: the tool itself and a list of resources that provide additional support and guidance for users. So you can see the 2 buttons at the top here, bottom of my screen. Scroll down a little. That's how you can easily navigate your way between the tool itself, which is the page we're on now, and those additional resources. Excuse me. So as Tanya said, we'll provide an overview of these 2 parts separately today, starting with the tool itself. So the tool itself looks like this. It comprises basically a number of expandable headings, which I'll quickly walk you through now. So scrolling down, you can see those grey headings there. And I'll just, yeah, they can be expanded by these little down arrows here. So the background section provides some information around the various stormwater management policies that have been introduced to the Victoria planning provisions over the past 2 decades. It also provides an overview of the best practice standards from the Urban Stormwater Best Practice Environmental Management Guidelines, or BEPM. So if you hear us use the terms best practice or BEPM today, this is what we're referring to. The section also has a link to the Planning Advisory Note 75, which provides information around the new stormwater management clauses introduced as part of Amendment VC 154 in October 2018. So that's the background section. We'll just close that down for now. The development type and corresponding clause chart basically, basically provides a ready reckoner of which VPP clauses apply to which development types via this table. So as you can see, this is done at a high level, breaking down land use into residential and non-residential, and development types into subdivisions and buildings and works, including both apartments and multi-dwelling development. Both the stormwater management and site management clauses are included in the table. The table is intended as a general overview. However, there's some specific considerations that may affect which clauses apply and when, and that's covered by the tool in more detail later. So this provides us a high level view of things. This table also provides us with direct links to the VPP clauses themselves. If you want to read through the detailed wording, it's just a matter of clicking on these various links highlighted here, and that will take you to the Planning Schemes Online page. We'll just close this section quickly. The best practice process flowchart for stormwater management basically provides an overview of the key steps involved in submitting a planning application that meets the stormwater management planning requirements. So you can see here everything from the very initial decision to develop through to concept design, pre-application meetings, and then the various design iterations and submissions through to receiving a planning permit, hopefully, and constructing and then ongoing maintenance. So again, just to guide perhaps the less familiar players through the process. The next section is very simple. It's an opportunity to sign up for updates on the tool if you so want to. And here's this email link as well if you wish to provide feedback to the Clearwater team on the tool. That's very welcome. So finally, it gets us to the Navigator tool itself. And you can see here instructions on how to use the tool to identify the stormwater management requirements for your particular development. Whilst the tool aims to point people in the right direction, as I mentioned before, we also strongly encourage applicants to discuss specific planning requirements with their relevant council before commencing their application, as it may identify additional or more specific requirements that should be met. So the tool itself is accessed by clicking on the Start button, and I'll quickly run through an example of how this might work. There's also a link here to the online Navigator tool flowchart, which clearly sets out the detailed logic of which clause applies to which development scenario. So this is what the tool is actually built around. I'll very briefly click on that just to give you a sense if you're a very rational thinker. This is exactly what the tool does, is work through this flowchart, but this is available to you as well if you so wish. So we click on the Start button here, and the tool basically operates by answering a series of questions, which you can click through in turn. So it's fairly self-explanatory. It starts by asking if the application is for a subdivision or for buildings and works development. So I'm going to run through an example now, just a fictional made-up one. So let's say that this is a subdivision development that we're dealing with here. So we're then asked for our zoning. If you're not sure what the zoning is, as some applicants may not be, you can use VicPlan to identify for your address what that zone is. So let's say in this instance, scroll down so you can see the zonings all grouped: residential, rural, industrial, commercial, and other. So there's the full list there. Hopefully all zones have been included there. Let's just say we're in an industrial 2 zone for the purpose of this application. We're then asked whether there's any particular exclusions. I won't run through this detailed list, but answer yes or no if you're yes to any of these, or no to all of these accordingly. So if we say no, there's no exclusions that apply. So we then get our landing page, which basically tells us what applicable stormwater provisions there are. So we can see here it's clause 53.184 and clause 53.186 that are the applicable planning clauses to this particular development. So the tool then sets out below the objectives of those clauses, both clauses pictured there. And it then runs through the various considerations required to prepare a stormwater report to meet the requirements of those clauses. So it runs through the various inclusions, I guess, in that stormwater report that are required. So things like the development layout, the layout plan, the modelling requirements, functional design considerations, site management and asset maintenance. And then in this blue box, it provides links specific to the type of development as per the questions that we've just answered above. It provides a link to a stormwater report checklist, which helps to make sure that we've included all of those right considerations and contents in our stormwater report. And it also has a link to a worked example specific to this type of development. And that's really useful in highlighting, I guess, the way in which we meet the checklist requirements, the levels of detail, etc. So it provides an example of what we might expect to be in a stormwater report for this type of development. And then the tool includes planning permit considerations, details for all the local councils in Victoria, so you know who to contact if you're not familiar with that. And then a whole bunch of resources here, and all of these feature on the resources page too, which we'll talk about shortly. That run through those various key components. So I might just show you quickly how we'll run a couple of different scenarios just to show how easy it is to change things around. So if you want to change the answer to your question, we're just scrolling back up here to the questions that we've asked. So you can either press the start button again and it'll reset, or you can just jump into those questions where they were on the screen and just change your answer to them. So we'll say this is a buildings and works application for perhaps a multi-unit development, 2 or more dwellings on a lot. And we'll say this, so you see the questions are a little bit different depending on our previous answers. So let's say here that yes, we'll say we're in a, general residential zone, for example. So we've landed differently now, rather than clause 53.18 applying, this is clause 55.03 that applies. And again, same sort of thing underneath, provides the objectives and then all the various considerations. And the checklist now will be different. It'll be for buildings and works rather than subdivision, which was in our previous example. And the worked example will be different as well. So this will take you to a multi-unit development stormwater report example. And everything else underneath, is again relevant to this particular example. So let's just scroll up and say, let's say we're not in a residential zone. So you can see that I've just highlighted, just clicked on the question that I want to change. So we say, oh, we said yes last time. Let's say no now. It asks us about any exclusions. So we'll say no in our fictional example. There's no exclusions. You can see now that we've landed at clause 53.185 and 53.186. So you can see that the tool is directing us to the applicable clause depending on our previous answers. So finally, let's just go back up the top. We'll say it's still buildings and works, but the application type will change. Let's say we have an apartment development, for example. So there's the various application types here. We'll say construct or extend an apartment development. We'll click on that. And now again, it asks us about our zoning. So let's just say we're right in the heart of the city and we're in a capital city zone. So now we've landed on a different clause, clause 58.038, which relates to apartments. If, for example, we weren't in a capital city zone, so we can just click on that question there. Let's say we were in a residential growth zone. We can click on that. Now it's asking us a different question, which is relevant to these particular planning provisions. Is the application to construct or extend a development of 5 or more stories? Well, let's say let's say it's not. Let's say we're less than 5 stories. So now we've landed on a different clause again, clause 55.07 and clause 55.03. So I might pause briefly there. I think you get the idea. It's fairly straightforward. I might pause for questions there, and I can see we've got lots of questions popping up already. Just while Tina sorts through those and poses one to the panel, I might offer, if anyone actually wanted to ask a question verbally, we can unmute some lucky person and hear from you directly. So please put your hand up now via the raise hand function if you'd like to ask us a question directly to the panel.
Yeah, I don't see any raised hands, so maybe I pose one from the Q&A section.
All right, thanks, Tina. That'd be great.
So we have a question from Biruta asking, does tool cover development applications requiring new easement for drainage downstream on nearby private land?
Sorry, can you just give that to me again, Tina? I just...
Yeah. Biruta is asking that, does this tool cover development applications requiring new easement for drainage downstream on nearby private land?
No, not specifically. So that, no, it doesn't take into account downstream easement requirements, which is sort of sitting slightly outside the VPP clauses that we're looking at here in the tool. That's a good question. And
then I have another from Shane Hardingham asking, how can councils direct applicants to the tool?
It's a great question, Shane. So, and other panelists, please feel free to jump in anywhere here if you like. So we can, the tool is available free of charge online via Clearwater's website. So Shane, basically what would be great is if your council has developed some pre-application guidance material around water sensitive urban design, which a lot of councils have done now. It's possible to include the web link direct to this to help guide those applicants through. I don't know, did any other panelists have comment on that?
So just in terms of where the tool is right now on the website, because I saw that Andrea had a question about that. So currently you can access the tool through the link, which we sent through in the reminder email. And then after the launch, it will live indeed in the resource library section of the website, but currently it's not yet live in that section, but you can access it through the link, which I will also put in the chat right now.
Thanks, Petra, that's great. And good to note, I guess, for Clearwater hosting this tool, that we don't want to go changing the web address too much if councils are putting this kind of information out there in their pre-advice to people.
And certainly as well with the DELP checklist in particular. So that's a checklist for subdivision development, so applicable for both residential and non-residential subdivision, and also a checklist for building and works, again applicable to residential or non-residential. So they're ideally these handy checklist guidance that councils can certainly communicate to their applicants and also use them during the assessment process. So they can link them to their website or have available hard copies on their information desk or something like that to support applicants in what the requirements are. That would be great.
Thanks, Mandy. And those particular tools, the checklists and the worked examples, are so useful that I will talk about them in a bit of detail in the next segment as well. But thanks, Mandy. Tina? Okay.
Yeah, so another one is from Nikki Granek. Asking, does the tool identify that for subdivision or development in growth areas, it's possible that some stormwater requirements might be specified in a precinct structure plan, and these would also need to be met? It's a long one. Do you want me to go over it again?
No, that's a great question, Nikki, and hi. So in the FAQs, we do comment a little bit on PSPs and indeed Melbourne Water Development Services schemes. So we'll talk to the FAQs a little bit later. the tool itself perhaps doesn't flag that as clearly as it should. So happy for other panelists to jump in. It does note that, in essence, the requirements of, like in an urban growth zone, for example, the requirements of the applied zoning will need to be met. That is factored into the tool. But hopefully that's reflective of the PSP, but it's a good point that there could be specific PSP requirements that need to be considered in there as well. Thanks, we'll take that on board.
I have another one from Anthony Sang. Can the Navigator tool be expanded to cater for concurrent development and subdivision applications under development type?
Good question. So, Anthony, I think inherently the tool does address that. I guess what we want to avoid is double up if that's occurring. The requirement should fundamentally be the same. I'm just sort of thinking through this in my own head. So we should avoid double up, but I think really what you'd have to do is run the tool for development and for subdivision and see where both of those are landing. And then obviously the resources that are recommended to assist, will largely be the same. But if I think I think you'd have to run it twice and then see. So, for example, if subdivision is occurring of buildings that have, one per lot, then the subdivision requirements don't apply. That would be picked up at the development stage. So it is picked up within the tool, but you might actually have to run those two at the same time to see where you land. We've probably got time for one last question, Tina, I think, before perhaps we should move on to the next section. Okay,
so this one is from Ed Inspect. Is there an option in the tool to choose multiple uses within a vertical mixed use development, example residential and commercial, or would the relevant provisions be covered simply by selecting apartment or residential development?
Yeah, so great question. So the requirements that the tool basically, it bases itself on the type of application and then the zoning. So it's the zoning that would be important if you had a mixed use development like that. So yes, the tool does account for that. Okay, well, look, I know we're getting lots and lots of questions in, so thank you. We might be able to hold some of those over if we've got any more time at the end. But what I'd like to do now is quickly move to the resources section. So the resources, including those referenced within the tool, plus some more, can be accessed via the resource button at the top of the page. So let's just scroll our way up quickly. And you can see here, additional, click on new page. If we want to go back, we can click here to go back to the online Navigator Tool homepage, which is where we were. So on the resources page is a selection of some of the best available guidelines, tools and resources to guide professionals when implementing water sensitive urban design, or WSID, in new developments. There are also a list of FAQs at the bottom. So I'll step you through these resources in a moment to familiarise yourselves with what's there. And of course, we encourage you to delve in subsequently and get to know those resources in detail. But before I do, I really want to hone in on some of the specific resources, the checklists and work examples that Mandy mentioned before and that I referred to in the previous segment. So these checklists and examples have been led by DELP and are available on DELP's Stormwater webpage, as Mandy said. As Mandy mentioned as well, there are two checklists, one for subdivision and one for buildings and works. So I'll just quickly scroll down, show you. These are located here. There are also 4 worked examples showing what a stormwater report might look like and what it needs to include and consider depending on the development type. So the 4 development scenarios covered are multi-dwelling residential buildings and works, non-residential buildings and works, non-residential subdivision, and apartments or high-density residential. So we don't have time for me to show you through all of these today, but I will show you an example of the buildings and works checklist, and then the non-residential subdivision non-residential buildings and worked example. So just simply a matter of clicking on this stormwater checklist for buildings and works. I'll just bring this up a little more so everyone can hopefully see it okay on their computer. So it's a fairly straightforward little checklist that's really valuable, hopefully, to both applicants and assessors of planning applications. So again, there's a little spiel at the top that says sort of what provisions this is relevant to. So you can see there's actually multiple clauses here covered by in the buildings and works realm that this is relevant to. So 53.18, 55.03, 55.07, 58.03. There's, yeah, they're all identical for the purpose of the checklist. So what this tool basically does is it gives you a whole lot of checklists broken down into subheadings. So we start off with a proposed development description, and there's a checkbox here around describing the proposed development, and it gives you some detail as to what should be included in that. Section B is around site layout plan, catchment areas, and water sensitive urban design treatment systems. And again, a series of checklists. So we're looking at a site layout plan, indicating site boundary, dimensions, total site area, etc. Showing the location of legal point of discharge, and specifying the areas of drainage, areas draining to each downpipe and treatment system and the legal point of discharge, and so on and so forth. So you can see the different inclusions as we go down. Where this is really useful is certainly in my experience working with local government around assessing these. Sometimes there's confusion as to sort of exactly what information is required and when do we send back a request for further information and when don't we. So this helps to answer those questions. You can see it then moves on to modelling and compliance. And it gives some, sorry to bounce up and down, it's in 2 columns, as you can see. So providing relevant modelling, music, storm, insight, water as appropriate, what you actually need to achieve in terms of the best practice requirements, and then a summary of modelling input parameters, etc., etc. Finally, we get down to functional design requirements or considerations. And so this provides some indication of the kind of sectional views of plans for the WUSD treatment systems, etc. As we go down, relative levels, details of pipe connections, plant species, and so on. So hopefully you're getting a flavour of the kind of checks that need to be made. I should pause at this point and say all of these checks are actually cross-referenced within the worked examples that have been developed. So you can see exactly when we get to the worked examples, this is what they meant by, requirement E1, it needs to look something like this. So we'll get to that in a moment. So site management plans, so statements outlining environmental protection measures, and showing those measures on a plan suitable for endorsement to make sure that they actually happen. And then finally, we consider asset maintenance as well. So some councils require that an asset maintenance plan is provided as well. So again, we provide pointers as to what needs to be included here. So clear diagrams with labels, identifying key elements to be maintained, checklist summarising those treatment elements, how frequently they're inspected, etc., and who's going to do it. So without wanting to spend too long on that, I think it's useful just to give you a quick spin through it so you know that resource is there. I will quit out of that quickly and just go to our example, our worked example stormwater report. So we'll pick on the non-residential buildings and works. So I'll just expand that a little bit too. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So just scrolling down through this. So in essence, this has been developed to show, I guess, the minimum information that should be included when lodging a stormwater report as part of a planning application. So in this instance, this one responds to clause 53.18, which is outlined here, what those objectives and the actual standards are. So as we scroll down to this point, we actually get to this sort of worked example where we start to see the kind of information that we would expect to have. So these are the same subheadings that we saw in the checklist: proposed development description. And you can see here, there's our actual checklist item around what needs to be provided if we're trying to cross-reference that checklist with what's been provided in this worked example. So you can see the kind of description that we might expect to have in there. I won't go through all the detail because we will run out of time. Again, section B, stormwater layout plan, well, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. So you can see what's included on here. So if someone gives you something that's too rudimentary, you know what you need to go back and ask them for. Scrolling down a little bit more. So this is roof areas draining to different points here. So we can see we've got rain gardens treating some of the roof here and some of the car park, some of the roof going to a rainwater tank, the rest of the legal point of discharge. And then some of our, a summary of where those various subcatchments are going. And you can see again, all the time on the right-hand side here, we've got this cross-reference across to the checklists. And so on and so forth. So I'll let you explore this in your own time, but you can see there's the modelling requirements are there, music modelling, etc. So you get a real sense of what should be provided by an applicant around this. Functional design considerations, you've got plans, etc. Planting species, site management plan information, as you can see here. And finally, the asset maintenance program. I should say we've included in these blue boxes relevant links. So if you can click on any of these, and that will take you to some of that guidance information that provides further detail on exactly how all of this should be dealt with. So I'll jump out of this example quickly. Being mindful of time, I won't run you through all these in a lot of detail, but just really quickly. So we're back on the resources page here that we landed on at the start of this segment. And we can see there's a whole lot of subheadings here with a whole lot of resources underneath them. So planning, so if you want to know more about how the actual policies work and everything from Vic Plan to planning schemes online, etc., that's all there. We've got, as we just saw, the checklists and development scenarios themselves. We've got particular documents that are really useful from that stormwater site layout plan side of things. We've got information here about modelling, so the various modelling options and support tools. We've got functional design considerations here. So these are various guidelines documents that helps, as many of us are familiar with, the WSID engineering procedures, the adoption guidelines of biofiltration, etc. So really, there's a one-stop shop for all the information that you should require as part of assessing this. Similarly, for site management plans, a lot of the EPA guidelines, etc., featured here. And same again for asset maintenance. So they're the resources that are provided. In addition to that, at the bottom here, we've got some FAQs, frequently asked questions, around the online Navigator tool itself. Everything from what does the actual tool do to some more specific bits and pieces around, as we get through zoning, urban growth zones, PSPs, etc., modelling tools, and some additional questions there. And finally, if you're getting bamboozled at all by some of the abbreviations or terminology, we've got a definitions and abbreviations section at the bottom. So I'm going to leave things there for a moment and ask Tina, have we got any questions that you'd like to ask the panel?
Yes, there's a favorite one that's from Matt Payne. Does every planning permit application now need to be accompanied by a toolkit response? And I guess a similar one from Andrea. Sorry, I'll have to scroll down to get to Andrea's. Will assessment via the online tool be a specific requirement under the planning scheme, and how will an applicant know?
Okay, so the answer to that question, and Mandy, I'm happy for you or anyone else to jump in, is no. So this is a support tool that we have developed here. It is not a requirement to be completed. Councils may choose to use it, lean on it heavily, not use it at all, as they like, but it's really there to try to create a smooth path for both applicants and assessors to know what needs to be submitted. So no, this does not set out a requirement. It is simply a support tool to indicate the kind of information that might be ordinarily expected.
Okay.
And I'll also say as well, yeah, so it's a non-statutory user guide, so it outlines the information that applicants need to consider and that assessors need to consider when meeting stormwater planning requirements, but it's not, you don't have to use that guide. However, it is quite useful, particularly the checklist. So if councils wanted to make those checklists available to applicants and, like I said, have those handy when undertaking their assessments, I'm sure that would be very useful for them.
I have another question from Lou Hawkins. For CASBE councils, does this tool complement or have any interrelation with BESS?
So BESS, yeah, I guess it's in some ways it's related to the previous question. So this again is not a requirement. It might support, it would support the aspects required under BESS that relate to stormwater management.
And sorry, Jamie, could you also just, I was going to say, can you just outline the acronyms just for the interstate people in the audience that might not understand what we're referring to when we say BESS?
Yeah, so BESS, sorry, now you caught me on the hop, the Built Environment Sustainability.
It says Sustainability Scorecard, yeah.
Scorecard, thank you, yeah, good one. Yeah, so that's a tool that encompasses, just for those interstate, encompasses the stormwater management requirements along with a whole lot of other sustainability requirements from, you know, energy, materials, et cetera, no, this, other than to further support the stormwater management requirements that are already integrated within BESS, this tool should not have any other impact on the CASB councils or BESS in that regard.
Okay, so I have one from Birut asking, yeah, how is maintenance of inter-allotments drainage not part of development application dealt within the tool?
Sorry, Tina, can you just give me that one again? Sorry.
Yeah, so it's about maintenance of inter-allotments drainage. How is that not part of development application in the tool, dealt within the tool?
So if I understand it correctly, by inter-allotments drainage, I guess if we're proposing any water sensitive urban design that is not on private property, that would need to be factored into the maintenance aspects of the submission. So council would need to find it acceptable if the proposal was that they would be maintaining, you know, a wetland, for example, or a bioretention system created to service those developments and meet the stormwater management requirements. That would need to be assessed by council, yeah, based on the stormwater report proposal to see whether that was something that they were comfortable with or not. So I don't think there are strict prescriptive requirements on that. It's up to each council, I guess, to go through that process themselves and work out whether they are comfortable with a proposal like that. But yes, that would definitely be something that needs to be considered.
Do we have time for one more question?
I think we do have probably time for one more, and we're happy to take more general questions rather than those just around the resourcing too, if people like.
So there's one very popular general question asking that why is the Navigator tool not hosted on developed site? Because that seems to be a common approach.
Mandy or Petra, I might throw to you guys on this one. I've got an answer, but
Hi, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. Yeah, I think this is it's a capacity building resource tool. So I think that was the intention of why, but it's certainly stormwater, DELP's stormwater webpage that has all the DELP checklists and guidance and other useful information, has a link to the portal, and then the portal sits on Clearwater's website. And the original I suppose, idea of this was that way back when Clause 56 for residential subdivisions was originally developed back in 2006, Clearwater developed, I think with your assistance, Jamie, a tool specifically for Clause 56. And I think there was even a comment in the questions about a Clause 56 tool. So this is how this Navigator tool started. So it was like, oh, we should develop something for the new amendment like what Clearwater had for the original Clause 56, but then it sort of broadened out to be this one-stop shop for stormwater management and pull everything in and be this wonderful thing that it is now. So that's great. And I think, and in terms of Matt's other question around storm and upgrade for small development types, yeah, just to let the audience know on that. So DELP is certainly investigating options for a tool appropriate for small developments, and we did go to market for that tool redevelopment, but we had to withdraw it because we couldn't find a suitable host and the bids came in higher than we have budget for. So we are expecting to go back to market for a simpler tool in the next few months. So we're certainly committed to that. And we are working through that upgrade, and that will include other hosting options, and which does include the possibility that DELP will host. So yeah, that's sort of where we are at this stage.
I have one question from Andrea. How does the tool handle infill development where there is no opportunity to effect any change of site?
So good question, Andrea. So that's included in one of our development scenarios. So there is a townhouse development scenario. Let me just scroll down and I can show you. So the multi-dwelling residential buildings and works, that gives you a good example of how that might be dealt with. So it needs, the stormwater management requirements still need to be met on site. And that's indeed the same for, you know, say industrial buildings and works or the like. So it is all included in here. It's covered by the planning provisions, and there are examples here that you can have a look at that show you how that might be done.
Another question is from Erin. Are there support links within the portal that guide applicants or councils to training sessions or events on WSUD or stormwater management? So
there's lots of links there to various resources, guidelines, documents, etc. Not specifically to training and events, as far as I'm aware. And Petra, please jump in.
Yeah, that's correct. So if someone is looking for training sessions or events on WSUD and stormwater management, I'd recommend the Clearwater events page. And we are running trainings relatively frequently on both topics. So definitely keep an eye on that or subscribe to the Clearwater mailing list, because we do keep our audience updated about upcoming training sessions. So that's the best way to stay informed in that space. And also in terms of a bit of a smaller scale training, we are planning to create 2 short training videos around the portal and the portal use. So, and that will be on the tool, like in the tool, on the landing page. Yeah, I think that's all in the training side of things.
That's great. Thanks, Petra. Tina, we might have time just for one more, and then we should probably wrap up and make sure we send people on their way at 1 p.m.
So this one is from Jeff. Seems to me that the tool is being directed more to applicants. How would council staff, or say, example, engineers or planners, make use of the tool to help assess a development application if that council uses the IDM?
Yeah, good question, Jeff. So hopefully the way that we've developed the tool, whilst the IDM process might be slightly different, this picks up the the requirements of the planning provisions themselves. And I think that it should be fairly similar in terms of what's actually required. So the IDM process shouldn't really change. The information that's required to be submitted, it might be in a slightly different form, but those same considerations that we've got listed in the tool and in the worked examples, and specifically in those checklists that councils will definitely find helpful, I hope they will, in assessing those applications, those considerations should all remain the same. So unless any of our other panelists have got anything they want to add, I think I might hand over to Tanya Struzina just to wrap up for the day. I'd like to say thanks to everyone for listening in. It's great to get such amazing numbers in attendance. So thank you, good luck, and over to Tanya.
Thanks very much, Jamie. So that, as Jamie said, it brings us to a close. We encourage everyone to visit the portal link that we've sent to familiarise yourself with the functions and the resources that you've just been shown. As Petra said earlier, in the coming months, additional training videos will be added to the portal. And for anybody that missed today's event, there'll be a recording of today's launch on the portal. And as Petra also said, we do invite you to visit the Clearwater Training and Events page to see upcoming events. One event that we'd like to highlight that's coming up in May is training for design reviewers on the Constructed Waterways Design Manual, the Melbourne Water one. So yeah, anybody who that's relevant for, jump onto our training page. And thanks so much for joining us. Clearwater and DELP would like to thank you. And we trust that this tool will be of great assistance for the industry and the community. And please ask any further questions to us via the Clearwater site. Thank you.